Hello, and welcome to Get Recc'd. I am your host, Don Falgout.
And I am your other host, Stephen Falgu. Get Recc'd is our occasional podcast where every week we recommend something to each other, be it a movie, mostly an album, or a video game, along with some other oddities here and there. And then in the following week, we talk about it.
Yes, and today on episode 54, which is a huge deal, and it's a huge deal because we're talking about Jurassic Park 2, and not because my name is Don now, although that's also a thing. Yeah, so I'm Don, hi, and I'm gender fluid. My pronouns are they, them. Thank you, podcast listeners. I think my YouTube listeners know this, but just for the record. Which means that if you talk about me, and you don't use that those programs, those pronouns, I'm blocking you from Get Recc'd. You're never going to listen to us again. So, just saying, watch out.
Yeah, they will find you.
Even in everyday conversation, you're screwed. You're never listening. If you say it out loud in the ether, I will know, and you will never hear us again. And I know that
You'll
would
get
be
blocked in real life.
Yeah, it would be like it would really be the worst punishment, honestly, because my life would not be enriching in the slightest if I wasn't here on Get Recc'd. But if I couldn't even listen to Get Recc'd, I don't know what I would do.
I also want to say that this is a particularly exciting episode because for the first time in what feels like since episode 2, we actually met the 2 weeks. In fact, we're even early by a day.
Yeah, which is, you know what? Which is once in a lifetime. Okay? It's never happening again, so cherish it. Okay?
We do that for you listeners.
Yeah. Well, and viewers. You almost said viewers, but honestly,
I did.
Both are accurate. Both are accurate. And I would do a speaking of transition, but it's impossible to do for this, so I won't. We're just going to get right into, Stephen, if you don't mind, what you recommended to me last time.
Yes, I recommended The Lost World, Jurassic Park, or more colloquially known as Jurassic Park 2. See, I practiced it in the 2 weeks between our 2 episodes. I practiced that word. I won't say it again, but
it was good.
The Lost World Jurassic Park was a 1997 film, so a few years after the first initial Jurassic Park film. This one was again directed by Steven Spielberg, yet only really included Jeff Goldblum as one of the key cast members from the original film. You also had some others, John Hammond and his grandchildren show up, but for the most part, Jeff Goldblum is really the only recurring character. This is the other film that was based on one of Crichton's actual books, although not nearly as successful as Jurassic Park, the actual book I'm talking about, not necessarily the film. So with that, Dawn, I will throw it to you to talk about The Lost World, Jurassic Park.
Yeah. So first of all, like, I know that last time you had said we're probably bound to talk about something else from Jurassic Park in the future, and I hope that we do. I think it's actually kind of fun to start with this one, though. This is like, I don't know, to me this kind of feels like the weirdest one. Yeah, like, obviously, I mean, it kind of goes without saying that the first Jurassic Park is just spectacular. But, like, I feel like reviewing this is almost going to act as a review for that, because in so many ways, this strikes as, like, just worse in every conceivable way. Like, in every single way, this movie's worse. There isn't really a single thing that The Lost World does better than Jurassic Park 1, and there isn't a single thing that it even does as well as Jurassic Park 1. I mean, first of all, there's a very major difference between the two, like, plot-wise, and even kind of setting-wise. Like, want to try not to criticize the plot too much because I don't know how much is just straight from the book and how much was changed. I have no idea, and I don't want to criticize the movie for things it had no control over, I suppose. But you know, in this film, they basically have a reason to go back to where the dinosaurs are, although it's a separate site that I guess they were breeding the dinosaurs on or something. A different island. So it gives them an excuse to go back and, you know, do shit with dinosaurs again, which is great. But the weirdest thing about it to me is that of all of the ways to do that, this just feels like it just feels like the most bizarre thing from a movie perspective, because the character who returns is Jeff Goldblum's character, Dr. Malcolm, who in the first movie, I don't want to say he was like comic relief, but he definitely was like the charmer, I guess. And he was comic relief sometimes. He was really there in the cast to bounce off of the other characters, but definitely not to like take the spotlight, because he just was not cut out for that. Like his character was, you know, intentionally awkward and Jeff Goldblum-y. I mean, it just putting him in the lead role here is like the weirdest shit. Like he's so unlikable, honestly, when you have him as the lead, and then all the other characters are also like really not likable or charming at all. So you have a similar setup to the first movie. You know, you have this cast of scientists and then a kid, and they're at this island where dinosaurs have been bred back into existence, right? Just like in Jurassic Park 1. And without getting into all the extra stuff that happens, which I'll get into after, essentially, all hell breaks loose again. The dinosaurs start killing people, whatever, right? But, like, every single bit of that equation is way less interesting, charming, and thrilling than it was in the first movie. So essentially, you have a setup that doesn't work, and then everything that comes off of that doesn't fare terribly better. But I'll let you talk about what I was saying before I go into all the extra plot stuff, I guess.
Yeah, I agree. And I think the other thing is there are definitely components of the first film that they try to kind of harken back to, like, for instance, sort of shoehorning in this daughter that Jeff Goldblum's character has, having her kind of be like, you know, one of those central figures within the main cast here to kind of try to elevate the tension because, oh, it's a kid and kids shouldn't be around the big scary dinosaur stuff, which thematically made a lot of sense in the first movie. You're using these children not only to create increased tension, but also there was sort of like a plot reason as to, you know, utilizing the kids to elevate one of the small branching storylines in that first film. Whereas here, it's just kind of like his daughter shows up and he's like, hey, don't show up. And she's like, wait, I thought when you said don't show up, you meant I should show up. And it feels very pressured in. In fact, I would say majority of this movie feels very much shoehorned in. None of these characters really have a good relationship, honestly. The way the cast kind of bounces off each other is always slightly awkward. Even really the two primary characters, which are Ian Malcolm, Jeff Goldblum, and then Julianne Moore's character, they are supposed to be dating or something, but it doesn't seem like they're actually together. It's very strange. The other thing that I wanted to mention, and this kind of like goes past the plot, so I'll obviously let you talk back to that, but I'd like to hear your thoughts on this too. I think the biggest thing that stood out to me between this film and the first Jurassic Park is the first Jurassic Park is very much one. I think it just holistically kind of flows better, but it's very much sort of a high tension thriller. Whereas this, I feel, gets more into almost like a dinosaur slasher film. Like, there are deaths in the first Jurassic Park, but those deaths elevate a very contained tension for the primary cast. Whereas this feels like a lot of times they're just creating dinosaur gore for the sake of dinosaur gore.
Yeah, total agreement. Because in this film, another big difference with the cast is that there's this this is it the B plot or is it the central plot? I don't really know. It could be considered either, but there's a whole concurring plot about how some corporation sent hunters to come take the dinosaurs and bring them back to, I think, San Francisco because yeah, San Francisco, San Diego, one or the other. San Diego, right. Because there was plans for a Jurassic Park to be built in San Diego, so they want to bring dinosaurs. It's kind of weird, but that's the secondary thing going on. But really what this serves to do for a lot of the film is just create a giant cast of people that dinosaurs can just kill and, you know, attack and stuff, so you can have, like, silly monster movie death scenes. Like, there are bits of this film, like one section where one of the members of this team, this hunting team, goes off to, like, go to the bathroom or something and then gets lost. And it's like this extended sequence where he gets chased by these tiny dinosaurs until they eventually kill him. That's like, it's really just there to get like oh, the dinosaurs are gonna kill the guy, you know, and that's like the only reason that it's in the movie. Especially because the tiny dinosaurs that kill the guy never show up again. So, like, they weren't even building up something. It's just, you know, just a death. And it was of a character who barely mattered, you know? So, I don't know. But that is definitely a lot of the movie. And yeah, I will say something, though, in regards to this movie trying to do things that the first movie did and doing them worse. That's absolutely true. But I will say that the movie is definitely very different. I can appreciate, in comparison to a sequel like Jurassic World, that The Lost World doesn't just feel like a rehash. Like, it's trying to give you familiar elements to the first film to guide you into a bit of a different dinosaur movie this time around, you know, and to carry you through those two things, like having Dr. Malcolm to make it a little sillier, and hey, that's the likable guy that everybody liked, so you can follow what they're doing in this movie. Because I will say the way the movie plays out is definitely pretty different. This entire thing about, like, the hunters trying to kill the dinosaurs and stuff introduces this sort of, like, villain of the movie that the first film just kind of didn't have. Definitely not in this way, anyway. And what is remarkable is how poorly they balance these things, because the movie's setup, when they first enter this dinosaur island, they have to hit the same beats that the first movie did, right? So you have to have the bit where, like, they stand in awe at the dinosaurs, except this time it's, like, so much less impressive. It's just, like, a couple Stegosaurus, and there's, like, wide sweeping shots of their faces in shock. It's like, I mean, I saw Jurassic Park 1, I get it, you know? Like, and a couple things like that, and then you have to have the scene where somebody almost dies by a dinosaur, and it's like, whoa, these dinosaurs are scary, we're scared of them. And then the movie, just like that, suddenly wants to make us, like, wants to make us and the main cast start feeling really bad for the dinosaurs, which is fine. Both of these films, I think, have a very similar message, which is that humans should not fuck with nature. In the first film, it was humans trying to sort of design nature and bring things back that were extinct. And then in this film, it's like humans are then trying to meddle with creatures they were never supposed to meddle with to begin with. So it's a very similar theme both ways. But it's just sometimes, like, really, really hard to sympathize with the dinosaurs the way the movie wants you to, because you can, like, tell exactly what it's trying to do. It'll have these scenes of, like, all these, like, tough macho men, like, attacking the dinosaurs, and, like, sad musical play while it, like, cuts to the main cast's faces, and they're all so, like, horrified and saddened by what they saw, you know, just moments after they almost got torn to shreds by Stegosaurus and T-Rexes and shit. And it's like, yeah, I get it, you know, the animals can't help it or whatever, but the movie just cannot find a balance between the, like, monster movie stuff and the, you know, feel bad for nature kind of stuff. It just feels really, like, ham-fisted and poorly paced.
Yeah, two things on that. The first, I would say, I definitely could have come across like this movie being a slasher film is bad, but I actually agree with you. I think that it took a different direction, and I really appreciate that because they did not exclusively try to basically recreate what Jurassic Park 1 did. However, I also agree with you that thematically, this movie is a lot more muddled because it is a slasher film. A lot of times your sympathies are not no longer for the dinosaurs or what I believe the core message of kind of Jurassic Park to be, which is what you mentioned, kind of like, you know, letting nature, like don't overstepping boundaries of nature and those sorts of things. But in this film, it's like they try to do that where the core cast of characters, like they fight against the military guys and they let all the dinosaurs out. But then they're like, oh, wait, shit, we let all the dinosaurs out. So now we're going to work together. And oh, God, the dinosaurs are coming to get us and we're all going to die. And then you start to feel for all these people who are just in this situation for, you know, reasons bigger than them because of corporate entity and those sorts of things. And then the movie tries to tie it all together at the end, which I'm sure we'll get into spoiler tags, but tries to tie it all together in the end. But at that point, the message is so confused, you really don't know who you should be rooting for. The movie makes it very clear who you should be rooting for at the end. But at that point, you're like, everyone in this film has really terrible motivation, and the dinosaur just ate a dog. So, like, what do you want from me, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, because I mean, when you think about like a wild animal getting out of a zoo, right? And maybe it hurts somebody. A lot of times these stories are very tragic because it's like, yes, like it's really awful that animal did something really vicious and terrible to a person, but also it's like an animal and it shouldn't be in that situation anyway. So it's like really tragic from both angles. And it feels like that's what this movie wanted to do. But it just doesn't. It's just so bad at it. Like, I don't know. Yeah. Speaking of spoilers, I don't have spoiler tags, but both of these movies, we may get into spoilers at any point. We kind of already have. I hope that's not too big of a deal. Just be aware of that in case you care. And with that being said, I want to talk about the finale to this movie. There's other things I'll get back to, but you just touched on it, and I have to say, it's the stupidest shit in the world. Like, nothing about it makes sense. So in the final sequence, a T-Rex gets loose in San Diego, in like the city. And this is because they managed to bring the T-Rex sedated onto a cargo ship and bring it to San Diego. But while it was on the cargo ship, the crew made a mistake of giving it some kind of drug to take it off of its sedatives. And it ended up... I just want you to think about this, okay? A T-Rex, this giant T-Rex, the only dinosaur that they have on this ship. Okay, because they brought the baby separately or something. The only dinosaur they have on the ship is a giant-ass T-Rex. This T-Rex, again, massive, managed to get into the crew's, all of the tiny-ass rooms where the crew were, the captain's quarters, and just pick off every single person who was in the ship, like the captain and some like person controlling the I don't know, the big gates in the ship or whatever, without damaging anything else, by the way, and then worked its way back to the cargo port of the ship, waited in there for the doors to open back up when it would then break loose and wreak havoc on the city. And it's just...
I do like how much they want us to suspend our disbelief for how controlled this T-Rex is. Like, the T-Rex woke up, was literally in the middle of an ocean on a boat, and didn't end up falling off the side or... No, instead, the T-Rex went into each individual room, ate the captain, made sure his arm was still on the wheel, so if anyone found them, then they... would know, and then as you mentioned, like went back in the hole and then kind of even closed the doors like up over themselves afterwards.
Which is just like, it's funny because Do you know how easy a super easy workaround that would have been perfectly in universe, perfectly in line with what's been established of these films? Have them bring velociraptors. Bam. You know? Then it's like still a little bit silly. I mean, the velociraptors walked around the ship and picked off people, whatever, but you can believe that. Especially going back to the first movie, when they're chasing the kids in the kitchen with how meticulous they are and they're able to open doors. I mean, it would have been perfect. And also, by the way, raptors running around the city, way cooler than a T-Rex, okay? The whole thing about Jurassic Park 1 was it showed that raptors are cooler than T-Rexes, okay? Everybody knows it. So I don't know why they went with the T-Rex thing. Maybe it's in the book. But, like, seriously, you could have just had raptors. It would have solved this entire problem. But no, because you have to have, the cool big dinosaur in the city. Also, the first scene where the dinosaur is in the city, it's like in a neighborhood. And it's like just calmly walking around the neighborhood. Nobody seems to notice. It gets into this backyard, and then you have this silly scene with the kid looking at it. And like, look, I get Spielberg probably saw this as like a really spectacular image, and I mean, it is definitely cool to see like the kid looking in the window, and then the T-Rex looks in, and it's like pupil dilates. It's like, it's a cool image, very Spielbergy, but like, this entire sequence just doesn't make sense. Like, the dinosaur will just be places. I feel like they should have just cut this entire suburban section and just gone straight to the dinosaur in the street, because at least then I would have been able to like see how it got there. But I really have no idea how this T-Rex gets into the city, finds the suburbs before anybody goes to track it down. It's just like, it becomes so ridiculous, and I do understand that there is definitely a big suspension of disbelief with Jurassic Park, and the first movie does have like a part or two that are just like very hard to believe. But this movie, this entire finishing sequence just seems to have gone like way overboard. It feels underdeveloped, and I'm sure it was cool for the trailer, but honestly, that's really all you can say for it.
Yeah, and you have like all the cars flipping out of control and the ship that crashes into the port. The unmanned ship that I guess just keeps going.
Yeah, like when the T-Rex went up into the captain's quarter and just, picked the captain off the wheel, it calmly walked back down as the ship continued on course. I don't know. Anyway, that's that. There's other stuff before that I wanted to talk about, but God, that entire bit is just like the worst thing. I will say, right off the bat, like, if we're talking about all these movies, Jurassic Park 3 is definitely worse than this, but, like, that San Francisco scene just feels to me like the worst thing that was in this entire series. Even worse than stuff in the second Jurassic World, which is a feat. But that entire sequence, I don't know, too much. But even earlier in the film, there is the last thing I wanted to touch on was the raptor stuff in this movie, among a lot of other dumb things that happened. But the finale, well, it's a fake finale because you have the San Francisco stuff, but the finale to the Lost World stuff in this movie is the main cast evading raptors in this like tiny area with just a few buildings. And I get it's very action-packed and it's very tense because the raptors are going to jump on the people, and we know the raptors are super smart, but I feel like, Jurassic Park 1 did a good job of not really underestimating the raptors. I feel like that kitchen scene is just so, like, perfectly directed and built and constructed and, like, storyboarded, where, like, the ways that the raptors get tricked and the kids get out of it just... They're super tense, but you totally buy it. It's like, yeah, I can tell these raptors are super smart, but they're not quite as smart as people are. And they're still getting fooled, but they're getting fooled in ways that are very, very believable. Whereas in this movie, the raptors are just fucking stupid. They're just really dumb. Like, they'll get up on a branch and, like, get ready to pounce, and then they just won't. They'll just, like, let people get away. And then, worst of all, is the scene where the kid, the daughter of Jeff Goldblum here, finally becomes very useful in this movie, which is when she does a gymnastic trick on a pole. She flips around the pole 3 times, then she shouts, "Hey, you," to a velociraptor, which then turns to look at her, and then she kicks it out of a window. And it is like the kind of thing out of a parody movie. Like, it is unbelievable. It is so dumb. I always forget that's in this movie. I've seen this like 3 times, and I always forget there is actually a scene in this movie where a child kick flips a velociraptor out of a window. But it does happen.
I also like the part where Jeff Goldblum gets away because the shingles. Was it Jeff? No, it was Julianne Moore,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, it was her.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. The shingles. She pushes the shingles down, which have the velociraptor on it, and it falls on its velociraptor buddy, and then they get into a scuffle, and she just calmly walks away.
yeah. She's just like right next to them, and they're just like biting each other because one of them fell on the other one, I guess. It is just it's like way too many conveniences. I yeah.
I do want to quickly, I know we already touched on it, but I do want to quickly go back to the Compsognathus scene, the little compies. Basically, the scene was kind of a payoff for an earlier. First of all, they were important to the very beginning of this film because they set up why InGen, the main corporation, was trying to take over because there was basically a cruise liner that ended up on this secondary island accidentally, and a girl gets eaten, or not eaten because she does make it out. They specifically tell her she gets injured by compies. Then this guy who ultimately gets eaten by the compies picks on one and like messes with it, shocks it with a stick or something. And so later, I just like the idea of this specifically Compsognathus took that and had revenge against this guy who poked him with a stick. It probably wasn't actually that one, but I want to believe that one like riled up all its friends to kill this guy. But the other thing, and you mentioned this, the thing about, and this I feel like, the reason why I'm talking about this is because I feel like this is a microcosm of this film's larger problems. The thing about the scene is it goes on for so long. Like, okay, the guy goes out to pee or whatever, and he tells a guy, hey, look out for me, but the other guy has his headphones in or whatever. On multiple occasions, it like plays on that dynamic. Like he yells out to the guy, and then we see, oh, look, the guy still has his headphones in, and then he'll be being attacked by little things, and then we go back to the guy, and it's like, oh, he still has his headphones in. It's like, we get it. But then not only, and this is where I feel like this movie starts to get into more of like a slasher, like dinosaur kill territory, but it's like, not only do these things attack him, and he gets away, and they like do a little dance or something, I guess, then we still are following this guy, and we're still continually cutting back to the guy with the headphones in until finally they end up killing him for whatever reason. I don't know why they didn't just kill him the first time. I don't know why it had to be so long, why they had to like extend it to 2 times what its length should be. But I feel like that's really a core problem with this film. It's like everything that they do here feels just a little too long. Like, and it's like this weird dynamic where they take something and then they'll cut back to it again, like within the span of the same scene. It's like you already have your suspense, but you draw it out even longer. Because the other one that comes to mind is when the T-Rexes show up. This is kind of in the beginning-ish of the movie, kind of the first dinosaur, quote-unquote, like, kill, honestly. Kind of in the beginning of the movie, the T-Rexes show up to take the baby that they put in their trailer. And then it's like this, they walk away and it's like, oh, okay, we're fine. And then the T-Rexes come back and like push the trailer overboard. And they're like hanging on for dear life over the cliff over the cliff above water. But then the T-Rexes go away. It's like, oh, okay, we're fine. Then the guy comes to help them. And then the T-Rexes come back again.
Yeah.
Like 3 times the T-Rexes come back, and it's like they do that a lot in this film, and it never really made sense to me.
I just want to say, though, to this film's credit, the only good set piece in the entire movie is that cliff scene, though.
Yeah, for sure.
It's like, because I will.
And the other thing, quickly, I'll just
Yeah.
say I don't want to cut you off, but quickly I'll just say the other thing about that scene, what's so good about it is what made the first Jurassic Park so good is that those dinosaurs are allowed to exist in the dark, in the rain, when they look the best too. So that whole scene just looks incredible, including the T-Rexes.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. And I will say, in general, this movie's effects have not aged as well as the first one. That's another thing I wanted to say. Like, that's another way this one's worse. It looks worse. They were too confident in the CG, and they showed too much of it. It looks pretty bad in this movie. But anyway, yeah, no, for sure. I think the set piece, though, is really, really a really great idea. Like, them hanging off the cliff with this trailer beneath them. She, like, falls onto the glass. It's really, really tense, and it's super, super well directed. But once again, it's a little bit dumb. And this is a minor point because I actually quite like this scene, but I have a couple questions. First one being, I get that the T-Rexes come back the first time, right? They get the baby, they leave, and then they come back. I understand that. It's explained later. Like, now it's their territory because they moved the baby, so now they want to get everything out of their territory. Okay, I get it. Here's a good question, though. How come they didn't just push the whole trailer off the cliff? Like, they kept at it until half of the trailer fell off the cliff. Why did they stop when only half of it was off the cliff and the other half would have taken like one more nudge? It would have been gone. Why didn't they do that if their whole thing is we need to get everything out of our territory? That's my first question. My second one, why do they come back? I don't get that. Like, okay, you went, you did your thing, you left, you came back the first time, you did your thing, you left. Like, why come back again? I have no idea. And it's another place where I think it would have been super easy to make this believable. You know what you could have, here's what you could have done. You could have had the T-Rexes are pushing the trailer off, they're like halfway done, they're about to get it again, and then something distracts them. Maybe another dinosaur, whatever. Could have been anything. And then they like have to run off and go after that thing, you know? Okay, they're distracted. They didn't have to finish. That's fine. But as it is, it's just like, I don't understand why they didn't just push the whole thing off. It just, I don't know. It seems like a little too contrived, a little too convenient. But in fairness, the scene is super cool. So there is that. At least it's super cool until the entire trailer falls around the leads while they're on the rope. That's a little dumb. But other than that, like, it's cool. It's just like, I don't know. It's another place where it's like this movie, like even some of its good ideas or some of its cooler ideas, like it's just a little too stupid. And that's a route that I don't think Jurassic Park 1 fell into almost ever. Yeah, I don't know. Even like as a the last thing I want to say, actually, the last thing is this movie is also directed by Spielberg, which I found kind of interesting because I don't really feel that a lot of the time. Like, this doesn't feel like a particularly well-directed movie. Like, certainly not in comparison to the first film, which is just, like, pitch perfect. Like, it is as pitch perfect as, like, a dinosaur thriller movie could be in terms of the directing, the sense of tension, and visually, too. It's a great-looking movie. This movie has kind of none of that. There's this one scene that I definitely feel the Spielberg in, and then the rest of it just feels like any old director who directs like dumb action or dumb monster movies or whatever could have directed, you know. There's none of those great shots. It's pretty dull looking. Not a lot of great tension. It's just like, I don't know. I almost find it hard to believe that Spielberg directed this, but I don't know.
Yeah, the other scene I wanted to call out was the scene where they're running from the T-Rex, because this movie is all about running from T-Rexes. But then they end up in a waterfall.
Oh my god. Wait.
The guy like gets a snake on him and he's like, oh no, I've got a snake on me. Better run into the T-Rex mouth.
Yeah, the T-Rex mouth directly in front of me.
But I do think the tension before that moment was actually pretty good in the chase scene there. The other one is when they're running from the raptors in the field. That one, it's very funny of a scene to me, but also I like the way that it was directed. But I agree with you, and it's not uncommon for Spielberg to do this. Like, I feel like Spielberg historically has had not great success with sequels. I don't know if it's something to do with the production budget, which ends up getting so inflated, or some studios pressuring down on him, or whatever it is. But just something with Spielberg, and the sequels that he directs, it just never is quite that same quality or that same even directing style. Like you kind of alluded to it, but like even the directing style of this film does not feel like the typical direction or directing style of Spielberg. So that's why it's just very puzzling.
Yeah, and that's I'm ready to wrap it up if you are.
Yep.
Yeah, okay. So, overall, I would give this movie a 4. It's not the biggest pile of trash in the world, but aside from paling in comparison to the first movie, it's just also a really unbalanced, messy, and generally unlikable movie. Like, it's hard to say a lot in here that's just absolutely awful, like maybe a scene or two. A couple of weird editing transitions that are super silly. But it's just generally like, for a movie about dinosaurs killing people, it's amazingly passe. It's just like, okay, I mean, dinosaurs are running around killing people, okay. Like it doesn't hold a candle to the original, and it also just isn't really a very good movie. So I mean, I don't recommend it. I feel like Jurassic Park as a series just shouldn't be. Like it really, I've seen all of them now. It's just like, just watch the first one. It's like the only thing that even remotely matters. It's not even the kind of movie that asks for a sequel. I understand this was a book that was a sequel to the original novel. That's fine. But you
Yeah,
know,
although I should mention, and I don't know if I mentioned this at the top, but I should mention that honestly, even this sequel, Michael Crichton's book sequel, wasn't something that he wanted to do. He really got pressured into creating a sequel to the novel, which kind of all happened at the same time that a sequel to the film got greenlit. So you can even imagine what that is like. Again, I haven't read the book, so I don't know how closely they tie, but you can definitely tell if this plot is the plot of the book. There's a little bit of a sense of begrudging, holding kind of a grudge against the fans.
yeah. Anyway, yeah, I don't recommend it. Just watch the first one. That's it. Okay.
I think I'm a little less harsh on this one, but not by much. I probably go up to a 5, maybe a 6 on a good day. I do think, to all the points I mentioned before, thematically it's really muddled. There are a lot of problems with, I feel like, the cast and the writing, but I do appreciate that it took a different direction than the first film. Now, I don't necessarily 100% agree with that direction, but going back and watching this and looking at it more as kind of like this dinosaur slasher film versus the very real thriller of the first one, it's interesting at least enough to make me not so super harsh on this. But with that being said, I don't recommend it. I mean, if you're a big Jurassic Park fan, I definitely think it's worth watching all the films just to appreciate the first one even more, honestly, because it really is the best one. But other than that, I don't think you should go back to this.
All right, so we'll move on to what I recommended to you, Stephen, which was the 1999 found footage horror film, The Blair Witch Project, which was spurred on by a super influential viral marketing campaign, essentially leading the public to believe that the film was real found footage based on real mythology of a Blair Witch. The website for this is still up, which I was shown a few months ago, and you can look at all of the supplemental material that was available to the public before the movie came out if you really want to. Obviously, this movie was like massively influential and everything, probably in a negative direction, but that's whatever. And anyway, I will leave it to you.
I do want to touch on that first, and I think it makes sense for us to touch on that first because it kind of is the build up to this movie. But I think what is, to me, the most interesting thing about this film is that it did utilize that viral marketing campaign before that really was a thing. Honestly, I guess I can best allude it to, and like kind of how I think about it, an ARG, which I assume you're familiar with.
Yeah, an alternate reality game, yeah.
Yeah. Because it kind of was that. I mean, they even had like a documentary on Sci-Fi like months before the actual release of this film to ground the film in even more reality. It was technically a mockumentary because, again, it's not real, but like that level of marketing for honestly a independent film is just insane to me, first of all. But then second of all, the forethought on that and like sending out wanted posters for the people in the film and those sorts of things. It's a really cool idea, actually. I really appreciate that they took that time to make this into something bigger than itself. So with that out of the way, I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
Not particularly. I mean, I've looked into. I will just say, as far as the supplemental material goes, that I think it's really cool. I think it did a good job at interesting people in the movie, but personally, I'm not as interested in it because I think the film actually does stand on its own. But we'll talk about that and whatever.
Okay, so now the film itself. First of all, I just want to talk about, I'm always looking at Wikipedia when we're talking about this stuff. I was looking at it for Lost World. I'm looking at it for this. Apparently, they had 20 hours of footage that they filmed for this. Cut it down to the 80 whatever minute runtime. But that's crazy to me. I can't even possibly begin to imagine what all that footage entailed. But anyway, so this is actually the first time I've ever seen this. I don't know if that's surprising to you, but I've never watched this before. So I went in completely well, not blind. I mean, obviously this film is so influential that it's like hard to go into this blind. It's been spoofed and parodied and utilized as inspiration and other things. So it's almost impossible, honestly, to go completely blind into this. And obviously I knew the premise and all those things, but I have never actually seen it from start to finish before. So I will say, I think the found footage format utilized here specifically, I won't talk about anywhere else, but utilized here isn't really captivating, actually. I think that just the actual found footage format itself, not necessarily talking about the film, but the actual format itself, I feel like there's so many possibilities for what that could be used for. Because honestly, as I was watching this film, maybe this is my first critique, it's a horror movie, yes, but I actually thought it was more interesting as like kind of a suspense thriller survival film, which in a lot of ways it is also that, as they get lost in the woods and they have to try to basically survive in the woods, because there's so much that you can play around with that format and that idea, and the way that they set up shots, even though they are supposed to be very amateur, the way that they set up shots is still very captivating in the way that you're getting this POV perspective. Now, one thing I wanted to mention, I'm going to be all over the place with this one, by the way, just to warn you. One thing I wanted to mention, the only thing that kind of took me out of the whole experience was that, so it's supposed to be found footage. This is supposed to be real footage that someone found. But there are like multiple cameras and multiple camera angles. So I guess somebody found all the footage from all the different cameras, which I'm sure will spoil this, but I guess technically ended up in the same place at the end. It just didn't really make sense. And the other thing that I'll mention is like, it also kind of took me out of it from the perspective of, it was oftentimes kind of hard to track like whose camera you were following, especially at the very, very end. You can piece it together absolutely by like the sound and who's talking and those sorts of things. But the like that whole thing kind of put me off of the idea. But I do think the concept is really strong, and I do think that they execute on that concept. I don't know if they execute on it perfectly, as I just mentioned, but I do think that they execute on that concept well. I think my biggest problem with this film is that the characters are very unlikable. Like, they honestly kind of behave, and I understand that like in a survival situation, maybe you would behave irrationally, but they behave so irrationally even from the beginning, and their personalities don't really click, that it is oftentimes more grating than anything else. I want to experience what these characters may experience, and they do a really good job of like upping the suspense in the suspenseful moments. Honestly, there's mainly a lot of like screaming and those sorts of things that these actors do a really great job and like kind of elevating all of that. But like the actual interactions between the characters are oftentimes just like so irrational that I'm not even like following what they're supposed to be going for. specifically talk about a scene that goes on for way too long, where there's this map that keeps coming up and everyone's trying to find the map, and where's the map, who took my map, and then the guy's like, oh, I kicked your map into the river, or the map wasn't helping, and they're like, why'd you kick our map, and I'm just like, okay, sure, I guess. But I feel like at that point it doesn't even make sense that these characters would do that, and it also doesn't make sense that these characters would even be behaving this way in this situation. One final thing I'll mention before I pass it over to you is the set piece really is the biggest thing here, because it is supposed to be found footage. I think what's most interesting to me, and this is where I feel like this type of format could really evolve into something more than just horror films, which I feel like it has kind of like propagated in the horror mainstream. Just like the woods setting is just so interesting and so creepy, and the way that these characters have to try to navigate the woods, and you're using really great, they filmed it at a perfect time, kind of the fall, where everything's a little dead, and you feel that sense of dread from not only like the actual just forest itself, but from the characters. That was probably the thing that struck me the most, and probably I will take forward, and that will kind of have an impact on me from the viewing experience of this. Okay, so that was a lot. I told you I'll be like everywhere, and I'm sure as we talk about it more, I will too. But do you want to say anything? Or,
yeah, definitely. Well, I mean, in fairness, it's not a focused movie, you know. Yeah. So a few points. In response to what you said. What I really like about this movie is that it doesn't feel like one. I have seen other found footage movies, and I've never seen any of them where it actually felt like a different experience than just a movie, but the director wanted to make it cheap. Like, it's a horror movie, okay, oh, we're holding the cameras, it's fucking stupid. And a lot of times, like, you also have the problem of, like, why the hell are they filming? Just like, why are you filming this? Like, I saw a movie called The Gallows, okay? That was the worst movie ever, okay? And that was a found footage movie where, one, it didn't feel like a found footage movie. The footage looked like movie footage, just held by actors. And you also were like, why in the fuck are they filming this right now? Why are they filming it this way? Everything is movie-fied, and it's not believable, and it's not investing, and it doesn't suck you into the movie. This, I think, is remarkable, because I feel like it's one of those things where I can totally see why people would have been fooled and would have left the theater actually wondering if what they saw was real or not. Because this movie feels super, super real. Like, the actors are fantastic because they are playing these just, like, college dicks. They're just, like, dicks. Like, they seem like people you've met. They're just, like, like they're, they have fun. Haha, we're friends. But, like, the second shit goes, like, a little bit wrong, they're all, like, getting up in each other's faces. They're furious. They're angry. They're, like, hysterical. And it's, like, to me, anyway, I agree that they're unlikable, but I really liked that about it because it's one of the things in this movie that makes it feel like it's not a movie. It's like, holy shit, like, this is something that could happen to me, Like, so many, anybody who's ever, like, messed around with a camcorder when they were a kid has always, like, filmed some stupid stuff or, like, maybe done something stupid for the camera or something, and it's, like, not that big of a stretch to assume, you get into college, you want to do this documentary, and you don't assume anything could go wrong. You don't plan it too well, you make stupid mistakes, you do stupid things, and it's like, yeah, you would. And that's what I really like about this movie, and I feel like every single one of the characters here, they don't feel like that. They're just, like, people doing dumb shit. But it's like, yeah, I could totally see it. There is the thing with the guy kicking the map, which is, like, definitely questionable. I feel like it's questionable, though, in a way that I can buy, with the way that their friend dynamic was set up and the fact that prior to him doing that, him and the other dude had been, like, so uptight about her using the map because they did not believe it was getting them anywhere. And, like, they're just like, fuck it, They start getting mad at each other. They start fighting with each other. And so it's like, yeah, that was definitely very, very dumb. But I don't know. I think another thing that this movie does super well is that it contextualizes every irrational and hysterical and weird thing that happens in the movie as something that the Blair Witch could be doing. Like, what is the Blair Witch? I have no idea. Like, nobody has any idea. You know, in the opening to this film, it's a compilation of like little interviews they took around the town of people talking about the Blair Witch myth, and there is absolutely no consistent thread because everybody that they're talking to has their own like variation of the story that they heard from their family or stuff they heard about. Just like what would happen if you went around and like talked to people in a city about some random urban legend, you know? Like, oh yeah, I've heard about that. It has like this thing, and I heard that the Blair Witch does this, but like there's no thread. So when they're actually out into the woods and crazy stuff's happening and they're acting weird and people are doing weird things, you have no idea what the legend of the Blair Witch is. So you don't even know. Like every single thing that's happening could be that the Blair Witch. And it's like it's that mystery that you want that in this film where absolutely nothing is explained, like to a ludicrous degree. You have no idea of any set of rules for this environment, for this legend, for this witch. You have no idea. So you're left so in the dark that it's like you end up questioning everything, and you end up like seeing every single thing that happens as a potential sign that, you know, the witch is actually there. And that's something that I think as a horror film, this movie nails, is that sense of mystery and keeping the audience in the dark to, again, a ridiculous degree. Like, some of the scares in this movie involve like a pile of rocks being there and they're freaking out. Like that's how ridiculous they went to make everything just like weird and like what the hell's going on, but it fucks with you. And I love that this movie puts you into those characters' positions, which is again another way that I think the found footage actually enhances the mood of it as well. And that's what I would say to that. Although I would definitely understand like why somebody would see some of these things as either uneventful or frustrating. I think that's what makes this movie interesting. But yeah,
I do like, this is kind of what you touched on, but one of the things that I do like about this film that kind of gives it that extra level of believability is that there is like this layer of documentary for themselves, like documenting their documentary, and then the documentary itself, and you see them filming both of those things. So you're kind of getting this understanding and this viewpoint of the characters and how they're interacting with the world. So specifically, there are some scenes where the lead, Heather, who's like supposed to be the director here, she is like in front of a cemetery and like, oh, the Blair Witch is this and that, kind of what you would expect from like a, you know, sci-fi grade documentary on the paranormal. And then you also get that viewpoint of these characters like behind the camera, even though it's all in front of a camera. And the other thing that you mentioned was how a lot of movies that use this footage or this format, they are filming in a found footage format, but it doesn't make sense why they're being filmed. And what's so interesting about this film itself is that like it even calls that out. Like that is one of the core points of contention in the film is like, why are you still filming this? Like we have to get out of this place, put the camera down, do not film this. So it gives you that extra layer of believability of like, wow, like these characters are really utilizing the lens, the film, to accelerate the plot and also to kind of like capture their own moments of weakness and terror versus like I've only seen maybe another like 2 found footage films. The ones that maybe are probably the most successful are like Paranormal Activity and Cloverfield come to mind. And when I think about Cloverfield as a found footage film, that is a movie. Like even though it's filmed in quote unquote found footage, it is just a movie. Like you can tell there was like structure and it feels like a theatrical release versus this absolutely 100%. The believability that this is just actual found footage, from the quality of the camera to the actual camera work and cinematography. I can absolutely, as you mentioned, I can absolutely believe that people would actually believe that this was real. versus a lot of those other films where it's like they're just using found footage to kind of capitalize on the format, but not really actually using it to its potential.
And can I just say something as well in regards to how they ask her why she's filming? I really like this movie's explanation for it. Because one, I mean, there wouldn't even have to be one. Like, you can understand, okay, they all, or at least Heather, or one of them at any given time has an assumption somewhere in their head, we're going to make it out, we're going to be okay. And they're here to do a documentary. So it's like, all right, you can see why they would film this stuff. Because it's like, oh, we could put this in the movie, even if they're not thinking about it in the moment, whatever. But I really like a line that they have Heather say where she's kind of like, oh, well, you know, it's like, I don't remember exactly what she says, something about how it's like a mirror. So it's like, it makes everything feel a little bit less real to her. Where it's like, oh, so it's like a lot of the stuff she's filming is like, it's comforting to her. It's like, even though they're lost and they're seeing all this crazy shit and they know that like this, or at least this witch is like after them or whatever. And it's like, you know, it's terrifying. By having the camera on and by looking through the camera and filming things, she can feel a little bit more like what she's seeing isn't actually real. I just really liked that. I thought it was a really cool moment of characterization in the movie and like another good reason for them to actually be filming. It's like, oh, wow, so it's actually kind of part of her character, which I thought was just pretty unique and clever.
So I guess, again, we don't have spoiler tags, I don't think, but I guess I want to specifically talk about the end of this film. Because I do feel like, personally, this is where I felt like the film was the weakest. I like the contrivance here. I like the format, the setup. I think it's a really interesting idea to take one of the characters out of the picture and bring them back as some sort of device that the Blair Witch is using, or who knows, honestly. As you mentioned, like there's so much mystery in this film. A lot of times you don't even, maybe this is personal, but like I don't even know what I'm looking at because of the way that it's filmed, because of the quality of the film and those sorts of things. Like there's a scene where Heather finds like a piece of his name's like Jonathan or something, right? Joshua's clothes, and there's something on it, and it's super freaky, and it's like you can't even really make out what any of it is because of the way that it's filmed. So they kind of set all this up. Then they go into this like spooky house where Joshua, did I say Jonathan again? Joshua is, and he's like yelling. And the other thing about this film is like there's always noise, but you can't really make it out. It's like always kind of distant. Like the witch sort of sometimes sounds like a cat or like a baby or something. And like with Joshua, he's distant. They're trying to find him. He's distant. And this is where I feel like this format kind of takes me out of it. I think I already mentioned it, but they're like swapping between the two POVs here, between the two characters actually filming, like going up and down the house, and they're trying to find Joshua, and then they find Joshua basically one at a time, and you have to imagine they get taken out or something because their camera falls on the ground. But this was where I felt like the film tried a little too hard to be that like actual kind of horror film. I love the tension here. I love that it's still clouded in mystery. You never see the quote unquote Blair Witch, whatever that is, if it's even anything, versus a lot of films coming after this. You absolutely would have seen that monster. It probably would have been a jump scare. So I love that part, but I do feel like, and again, maybe this is personal, I feel like because of the way that it's filmed and because of like the actual set piece itself, it's kind of hard to make out. It's hard to follow like which characters where and what they're doing. And then at the very specifically final end where like the characters are going in one at a time and the camera's falling on the ground and that sort of thing, that took me out of it just a little bit. So I wanted to kind of get your thoughts on like how you feel about that specifically final scene, like starting at the house.
Yeah, the ending. Yeah, I think okay. Yeah, big disagreement here because I think that this finale is like one of my favorite sequences to like anything. Like this culminates in like kind of everything I said I liked about this movie in regards to the horror element, where like it is the most, it leaves the audience in the dark to a degree where like you have absolutely no idea what you're witnessing. In this final sequence, it's like there were hints throughout the movie about some kind of incident where like there was a murderer who was like kidnapping people and like bringing them to this basement and killing them, and it's like, and you get the
And specifically children.
that's right, yeah, it was, yeah, and it's like you get the idea. It's like, okay, so like the what, like does the Blair Witch make people go crazy and do this, or like what? I just don't get it. And that's like, you see that kind of thing happen in the end, but it happens in such a way that's different than the way everybody said that it happened. So that, again, it's another place where it's like people are hearing these stories and it's clear that there's something going on, but nobody really understands what. And I love that when you actually witness it, it is just the weirdest, most confusing, but like simultaneously like terrifying thing. Like, this house as a final scene is like, again, it's small, but it's big compared to a lot of what's been happening in the movie, which was just seeing random stuff and like, what is that? Like, that's basically what happened up to this point. So even just going into a house feels like a huge event because of the way the film progressed before that point. But this final image of, I think it's Josh, but it might be, right? Isn't it Josh who's standing in the corner?
Yeah.
Like, standing in the corner. Oh my God, that's just like, when I see that, it's just like chills. Like, oh, it's just, that image got burned into my mind the first time I ever saw this movie. It was just the most like terrifying thing.
I 100% agree with that. I also like just in general, the world building here. I think we both touched on it, but in general, the world building here, like it's on the poster there that we're looking at on YouTube, but like the weird imagery, it's kind of like semi voodoo doll stuff and the rocks and all of that, I think is super cool. And then also the world building just specifically in that house, because as I mentioned, and as you just mentioned, there's like this story about this guy who would kidnap children and bring them into the woods and murder them. And in the house, you actually see children's handprints too, as they're going around. All of that stuff is impeccable. And then, as you mentioned, like as much as kind of like the confusion sort of takes me out of it, that actual final shot of like Josh standing with his back turned, facing the corner, just standing there, and then the camera dropping and the movie ending, I think is incredible.
Which again was another thing, if I remember right in the story, that the kidnapper would have all these kids and he would force one to stand and look away while he would kill another. And so it's like, I don't know. I love that this movie gives you tiny little hints and then forces you to piece something together out of it. Because again, it makes it feel like it's not a movie. Like in a movie, you would want there to be more, but I love that this movie doesn't feel like that. You don't want there to be more. It's like, that's what makes it believable, is because there isn't, but you have just enough. So it's like, okay, so I wonder then, like, oh, is this murderer still there? Is the Blair Witch the murderer? I don't know, but it's that like level of like, you're only barely aware of what's going on is what I think makes this movie so terrifying, which is something I didn't even say. Like, I think this movie is just horrifying. Like, horror movies are not generally scary. I don't know. They just don't possess that quality for me usually. Like, I definitely can feel tension in a movie or whatever, but just because like you come to expect like what a movie is, and the way a movie's structured, it makes horror movies a little bit predictable. Even some of the cooler ones, like, you kind of know what it's going to try to do to scare you. And the most effective horror films are the ones that don't really try to scare you so much as they do just make you really, really uneasy. That can be effective. And that's pretty much what this movie does. But because there's that extra layer of like it being formless and confusing and disorienting, is what I think actually makes this movie really, really work like as a horror film. Because it's one of the few horror movies that I've seen that didn't just feel like a horror movie. It was like really, really an experience that you were having alongside these characters, and obviously that experience is insanely scary. One, because you're lost in the woods, which is like terrifying, and two, because you're lost in the woods with a witch that you don't understand at all. It's like, that's really scary, and they do a great job not setting up rules for the witch, so you don't have any idea of what could happen, which is what I really, really like about the movie. Yeah.
I'm looking at the little plot synopsis here on Wikipedia, and the plot actually says that is apparently Mike, actually, that's in the corner. I don't know, it looked taller than that, but I guess
it doesn't even matter. They're just, yeah,
it doesn't really matter.
The guy, yeah, the dude, yeah.
Yeah. The other thing I wanted to mention, the final thing I wanted to mention, is how great it's on the poster here. How great the scene is where Heather is basically apologizing to herself to Mike and Josh to their families, who we've like started to kind of stitch together because we know like one of them has a girlfriend and has a job and all this stuff. Like, you understand that these characters have lives outside of this event, which also creates increased tension for the survival of all these characters. Like, you feel for these characters. And that, like, there's just a scene where she's just like staring at the camera as close as possible, like just apologizing profusely, crying to the camera about how like she forced them to keep going. She forced them to, or she, you know, said that she knew where they were on the map, all these things. It's just such a profound and powerful scene. It doesn't really increase the horror, but increases the tension and the world building and the suspension so much. It's just like, it's so good.
Yeah, it's so viscerally intense too. Like, for a crying scene, like, there's nothing pretty about that, you know? You see like snot coming out of her nose and it's just like, oh my god. Like, I just feel like that's so human, and it's, again, I think that scene is phenomenal. That's probably the best scene in the movie.
Yeah, I will say the other thing is, it's like, and because this scene makes me think of it specifically, I feel like what makes this movie work so well is that it always has you on the edge. And maybe this is more of a assumption going into what a horror movie is, more than the actual movie itself, but it always has you on the edge of your seat, expecting some sort of like jump scare or something like that. And this scene specifically is like, the camera's as close to her face as possible. It's pitch black. You're expecting something to happen, but nothing ever really 100% happens. Like, there are moments where the characters are screaming or running, or there's like a noise, or like the tent shakes and those sorts of things, and like the cameras drop and all of that. But like, even in a scene like this, that is just like this powerful human moment, you're still on the edge of your seat expecting something to like jump out at her or something, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, no,
But,
it
that's
is.
what makes it good.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, the pretty much the last thing I have to say about this movie is that, again, I guess just emphasize. I've already said it, but I just love the mystery. I love when I don't know what the fuck I watched, but I really enjoyed it. And this movie feels like that, where it's like, you can't. There's like, the hints spread throughout this movie are just way too few and far between for you to really piece together exactly what happened to them or what's going on while you're watching it, which makes this like such an uneasy and freaky and disorienting experience, where it's just like, what the hell? And like, things that shouldn't be scary at all become really scary just because you just don't know what's going on. Like, in any other horror movie or supernatural movie, they usually will set up rules or something for the creature, you know, so you understand. Like, when you're watching a scene, you're like, I know where this is going, but I don't want it to go there, which, you know, that can work, but there's something to be said about, I don't know where this is going, and that's it. You just don't know. What the fuck? Like, and I really, really like that. One, because it makes it believable, and two, just because I think it makes this movie really unique. And I just think it's really, really smart about how it did everything. Considering that I've seen like The Gallows, which is not a movie I recommend as well, but it's just like the polar opposite of this, where, I don't know, it just some dumb movie, you know, but with found footage, so it's even worse because it looks ugly and bad.
Okay, should we wrap it up?
Yeah, definitely.
One thing, I guess, before we wrap it up, although it is one of my critiques as well of the film, is I do think it overstays its welcome a little bit. This is maybe why I brought up at the beginning that it's surprising to me that there's 20 hours of footage and they edited it down to 82 minutes. I can't even imagine, because already as it is, I feel like the movie's a little over long. I feel like they could have brought some of it in a little tighter and still retain the same suspension. Although, having the runtime as it is, you do get to understand these characters and these set pieces a lot more. That, and as I mentioned, some of the things like some of the POV stuff and that sort of a thing, which I think, given more time, and if they were to go back to this, I think kind of with more polish, kind of brought me out of some of the experience. But other than that, the actual world building, the characters, the acting, the camera quality, and the cinematography, like everything top to bottom was structured in such a brilliant and very intelligent and precise way that it is such, personally, I think, a masterpiece in what a kind of found footage thriller horror film could be, and honestly should be, because it really is such an interesting watch. And as I mentioned, this is the first time I've watched this. I've never seen. I knew what it was. I have known some of the more important scenes out of this film because this film was so impactful and was spoofed so much. So with all that being said, I'd probably give it somewhere in the neighborhood of an 8, maybe even a 9. Honestly, I really enjoy this. I feel like I will watch this again a couple of years down the road, maybe even sooner than that, because I did think that it had such an impact on me, and like even just like specifically the actual found footage formula, which I never thought was very good. This showed me what it could be and what it should be, and I think that's really great. I absolutely recommend this. I think that it is a really great spooky time watch. It's scary, but it's not scary in the like, jump scare, super loud noise. But if you have the lights off and you watch this, especially because a lot of this movie is like pitch black, you are absolutely going to get your mind boggled. I think it's such an interesting film.
Yeah, and I would give the movie a 9. And I second that. I also recommend the movie, but I will acknowledge something that I didn't acknowledge before because I didn't think it was relevant, at least. But like, this movie is super, super contentious. We have Tyler the Creation saying it's a mid-ass movie, and a lot of people do think that.
Oh yeah, I was going to mention that too. Actually, I don't mean to cut you off, but I just wanted to, before you start talking about it, I wanted to mention in Wikipedia. I mean, the reviews of this thing are like so hot cold. It's like some reviewers, and it really depends on, I think, what your perception and what you want a horror film to be, because this is not your traditional jump scare, like, that sort of horror film. It is something entirely different.
Well, yeah, and it also defies your expectations of a found footage movie. Like and I think because of stuff like Paranormal Activity, but even things worse than that have taken this and just shown how dumb of an idea it is when you don't actually like think it through, or why is it a found footage movie, how bad it can be. It makes people perceive it differently, I think. But no, even when it came out, yeah, I mean, it was polarizing. And a lot of people say that this is like the most boring movie they've ever watched in their lives, which, like, I mean, I get that completely, I completely get that. That's not a difficult opinion to understand. So it's like, I don't know if this is for you, but like, I would hope people can appreciate, though, that like that this movie does what it does in a really unique way, and that it was smart about itself. Like, it wasn't just some dumb ploy, like a lot of these movies are. And that I think it actually like stands on its own. It's a pretty unique movie, even in this genre. So I would at least hope people could appreciate something out of it. But yeah, like, I don't know. I recommend it. I don't know if you're going to like it, though, but I really, really think it's really, really special. So, yeah, that's pretty much that. Do we want to move on to recommendations?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right, you go first.
Okay, Dawn, I am going to recommend to you a video game, which we do every so often. This video game is definitely in a genre of video game that we discuss quite a lot on this show. I think we've sort of talked about it before, but essentially, just because of the way that our podcast is structured, there's only so much we can really do in this space because of the potential time commitment that a video game does require. I mean, a lot of experiences now, honestly, are like 6 hour, I would say, minimum, and then going up from there. So not to say we're 100% pigeonholed into specific genres of video games. I mean, there is definitely a world where we could talk about stuff that we've played before and played a ton. But if it's something new, or if it's something that is recent, a lot of times we have to talk about a more streamlined or smaller experience, more replayable experience. So because of that, we'll be talking about something in the roguelike genre, which we have discussed quite a few times. I think we talked about Crypt of the Necrodancer and Isaac and some others. And we're kind of merging that in with another genre of game that we talked about before, and that's deck building. So, Dawn, I am going to recommend to you Slay the Spire. Slay the Spire released in early access, I think, in like 2017, but officially released all the way out in 2019. It is a roguelike game that takes some of the traditional roguelike ideas from games past, and it is also a deck building game and has been incredibly influential. There are so many roguelike deck building games now because of Slay the Spire, specifically because of Slay the Spire. So I thought that it would be an interesting one to talk about next time when we talk about Slay the Spire.
Great. And I'm going to recommend to you something that is rather timely because the infamous or famous, depending on which way you look at it, Rolling Stone top 500 greatest albums list got its update this year, and its long-standing number one greatest album, Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, got usurped and dropped 20 places or whatever by this album, What's Going On by Marvin Gaye. And I'm recommending it mainly just because I think that, to me anyway, it just is really weird to see this happen with Rolling Stone. It was not something that I would have ever guessed, that if they were going to drop their number one, that it would be Marvin Gaye, What's Going On. But I think that's super fascinating, and the album's very much worth talking about as well. So that's the only reason I'm framing it that way. It obviously stands on its own as a soul album by famous soul singer Marvin Gaye, written about the political nature of the time, I guess, with the Vietnam War and the ramifications on inner city communities of that era, and of course racial politics and whatever else. But yeah, that's my recommendation. I think that pretty much does it for today. So thank you, everybody. Hey, maybe we'll make it a thing and be back in actually 2 weeks. That'd be pretty cool, but I don't know. I can't promise that. Oh, as always, we are on CastBox. The link to that, if you're on YouTube, will be in the description. It probably isn't right now, but it will be. And if you're on CastBox, thank you for listening. But yeah, you can listen to us in the car, in the work, wherever, from CastBox. So yeah, as always, we're there. And I don't have anything else to add aside from that.
No, look forward to the next episode. And again, everyone, thanks for listening. We'll have a spooky episode coming up very soon, as we typically do. So be on the lookout for that.
Yeah, things may get extra spooky this year. You never know. I don't know.
We might be joined by even more friends.
I can't make any promises. But yeah.
We encourage everybody, as always, listen to whatever format you would like, but we encourage everybody to listen in live on the YouTube channel if you can for our spooky episode, because there's always a little fun involved.
Yeah, and that's about it, I think. So those were our thoughts. Those were our recommendations. Get Recc'd.